We are. Okay, so welcome to Mass Creative's virtual policy and action update for July 23rd. I'm here with the Mass Creative team, including G and Alex, also our summer interns, Mel, Nina, and Mia. We've got a full ship this summer, and we're really excited and delighted to have everyone. So we're going to start federal, and we'll work our way down. So I wanted to share a quick update around shuttered venue operators grants. So there's been some progress, right? Like this was the program that we were so excited. It actually got passed, the money got allocated, and then it just did not move. Well, there's been some progress. So far, 5.3 billion has been dispersed. And that means there's been a total of a little over 15,000 total applications submitted. And of that, a little over 50% have already been awarded. So they're working as hard as they can to get this moving. In Massachusetts, as of earlier this week, there's been almost $200 million awarded. The average award is around $796,000. There's been 244 recipients, and that's everything from large nonprofit organizations, museums, venues, obviously, talent agents and talent reps and theater producers. So it sort of runs the gamut. There have been recipients of those grants in 112 towns across Massachusetts. And I'm bringing this up to say it is not just happening in one part of our state where venues and applicants who have been significantly impacted by COVID are actually getting awards. And so that is a good thing. But we obviously know that that's not the panacea, right? We know that there are organizations that were not eligible for the SVOG grant. And then we also know that there's more need out there. So we're continuing to work, but this is just a good little update about what's happening. And in the chat, you'll see some resources. They also released a new FAQ that has more updates about the application process. So if you haven't applied and you think maybe you should, don't wait, you can still apply. So then let's move to the American Rescue Plan Act. So last week we had a much longer webinar, our American Rescue Plan Act funding teach-in. And so I do want to reiterate a couple of the points that came up last week around this. So again, the state will receive $5.3 billion for fiscal recovery funds. They have a wide agency about how to use that money. The legislature has made it clear that they are not going to just sort of pass it right along to the governor for his administration to decide, that they want to have an open and transparent process. And to that end, last week they had their first legislative hearing that was held with Ways and Means, with Chairs Rodrick's on the Senate side, with Chair Michaelwitz on the House side, and then with Chair Hunt on the House side, who runs the House Stimulus Oversight Committee. And so that first hearing was to hear from Governor Baker about his proposal, and from Secretary Heffernan, who is the Secretary of Administration and Finance, around what they think should happen. Mass Creative submitted submitted testimony to say that while we appreciate the governor's proposal, which would put $100 million into a fund that the Massachusetts Office of Tourism and Travel would have to spend on marketing for in and out of state tourism, as well as they had the leeway, or they could, if they wanted to, transfer some of that money into the Cultural Facilities Fund. We felt that that wasn't enough, and we felt that that wasn't the right uses for that money. And so we are really trying to make sure that the legislature understands that our sector is in need of significant and comprehensive and bold recovery dollars, and not just recovery, but to help us pivot and be more competitive as we all emerge out of the pandemic. So just to let you know that that's what we did last week. The other thing is that there's the legislature is planning on holding more hearings in September. We don't know quite how that's going to shape up, but as an opportunity for our sector to really voice what we need, or to provide input and feedback on the process, we will let you know and make sure that you can participate in that, because it's going to take all of us to make sure that our sector is included in whatever plan is put together. Then we talked about last week, we talked about the city and town funding. So just to recap again, so metro cities, these are cities with over 50,000 residents. They are receiving a total of 1.6 billion. Then towns and communities that have less than 50,000 are going to receive a total of 385 million. And then county government also receives 945 million. Now, we don't have county governments in Massachusetts the way that other states do. And so that county government money is actually going to be redistributed to the cities and towns within that county, so that they get like a little extra bump in terms of their money. You will notice this slide is very, very clear. This money is not fully committed yet, okay? So there is no grant program that you're able to, call up your mayor and say, hey, where do I apply for recovery funds? That's not a thing yet. What we need to do right now as a collective, as a sector, as like a network of advocates, is work on the local level to make sure that as cities and towns are making their spending plans, they are really carving out some of that money for arts and cultural recovery. If we don't do this on the sort of on the ground, right, on the ground level, on cities and towns and on the local level, the legislators are going to notice that. And so we need to be making sure that we are going after every opportunity for recovery and renewal money as we can. Okay. So you're seeing in the chat, I'm like, we're populating a bunch of the resources that we shared last week. And if you have any questions, a couple of folks have asked me already and sent emails back asking questions. I love questions. I welcome questions. So feel free to do so. So here's the work ahead, right? And we talked about this last week too. So we need to build local coalitions. So we are going to be so much stronger if instead of going one by one to our town managers and saying, the theater down the road, we really need support. The museum needs some dollars. We go as a collective and we say the arts and cultural community in our town has been really impacted by the COVID-19 and the necessary public health closures. Here's what we feel like is an appropriate plan for a total amount of funding that you could allocate from the fiscal recovery funds that you've received. And here's why, right? So you want to build that coalition. You don't want to go in one by one. You want to say, we're all in this together. Then you want to reach out to those local officials. And again, we've got all those resources to help you make that case and to think about, there's actually a list of what every city and town is receiving so that you can go in and make what feels like an appropriate ask, right? And that's going to be, obviously, it's not going to be 100% of the money that the city or town is receiving, but it's going to be, I would say it's going to be a significant amount, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask. All right, so now let's talk about the state budget. So last week, Governor Baker signed the budget He did make some line item vetoes, but he did not veto the allocation to the Mass Cultural Council, which is where most arts and cultural state funding comes from, right? So it's going to be 21.4 million. Again, there are 1.37 million in earmarks, specifically a $1 million earmark for a specific program for AAPI organizations and communities, right? So the Mass Cultural Council, I believe right now, is working on what their spending plan is going to be for fiscal year 22. And I suspect at their next full board meeting, they will approve that and we will start seeing that money roll out. But that's where we are. The legislature does still need to deal with the line item vetoes that the governor made. So the governor, right, he made some line item vetoes, he sent it back. The conference committee is now going to negotiate those and then will, most likely override the majority of what Governor Baker has vetoed. But that's the process moving forward. One thing to note, and I think this is an important piece, is that Governor Baker vetoed a pause on the charitable deduction law. So get ready for a little bit of inside baseball. What feels like a million years ago, there was some really comprehensive tax reform that happened in Massachusetts. And one of the things that they did is they said, okay, there are going to be a couple of like circuit breakers, right? When revenues hit this number, we're going to do this. When revenues hit this number, we're going to do this. And one of those was when revenues hit a certain number, and we're so far out from that reform, we're going to increase the state charitable deduction, right? So the amount of money that someone can write off on their taxes for any charitable deductions that they've made is going to go into effect. Well, it was supposed to go into effect last year. With the pandemic, they sort of paused that, but the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network is really urging that the legislature actually put that charitable deduction law into effect, especially because, right, where our sector, the nonprofit sector writ large, needs as much support as we can get, and getting that through an increase in private donations because folks are incentivized because of the charitable donation is a good thing. So the legislature, the budget that they sent actually continued to pause that charitable deduction, and Governor Baker vetoed that, saying like, let's do that charitable deduction now. And so we want to make sure that happens. So we're going to be writing some communication to leadership saying we support moving and having that charitable deduction happen right now. That's just a little bit of inside baseball, but an item that I'm sure many of you would be interested to know about. Okay, so then the other big thing, right, like the legislature is also looking at a couple of other pieces of legislation. And yesterday, the House took up their sports betting bill. So in Massachusetts, this would allow for betting to happen on sports, professional sports and college sports. And this has been an issue that the two chambers have had a really hard time kind of getting on the same page on for a while. Last session, there was a sports wagering legislation. It just didn't go through. Well, yesterday the House passed their version. The whole bill covers, as I said, pro sports. It covers college sports. It allows the 3 brick and mortar casinos to be able to have sports betting. It also allows them to have licenses so that they can have online applications so that they can do online betting for sports, right? But interestingly enough, some of you may know that when the original expansion of gaming that allowed brick and mortar casinos to happen about a decade ago went into place, they put a provision in, which is of the taxes collected from wagering and from casino betting, 2% of those would go into a gaming mitigation fund for arts and culture, for the Massachusetts Cultural Gaming and Mitigation Fund. Of that, 75% of that 2%, I know we're doing some like deep level math, but 75% of that goes to a specific grant program that allows a nonprofit and municipal presenting organizations, presenting spaces to apply to get money so that they can pay to be competitive in the rates that they offer touring acts to compete with those casinos. The other 25% just goes into a general organizational support fund that the Mass Cultural Council actually last year used to provide some additional COVID-19 relief and also some programming and some technical assistance, right? So they were able to use that money to respond really immediately. So in this version of the bill, that doesn't exist, right? So that the revenues go to different funds. And so what we did is we worked with Rep. Fernandez, who's the vice chair of tourism of the Tourism Arts and Cultural Development Committee, to file an amendment, Amendment 28, that would say, look, there's a precedent here. When there's casino betting in Massachusetts, there needs to be money that goes to arts and culture in Massachusetts. And so this would take, again, it would take 2% of the sports betting revenues and put it into that mitigation fund. It would also say that all of that money goes into that sort of general organizational support fund, because we know that the impact of online betting is going to impact not just brick and mortar spaces, but a lot more organizations as consumers say, like, I'm going to do something else with my leisure dollars. Unfortunately, that amendment did not pass. It was withdrawn, which is sort of like just part of the process, right? So it wasn't going to be supported. So we withdrew the amendment. That whole piece of legislation is now going to go over to the Senate side, and they're going to negotiate their version. And so we're going to work really hard to make sure that the chair of Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, who's Chair Eric Lesser, as well as Chair Rodrigues, who's Chair of Ways and Means, as well as Chair Kennedy, who's Chair of Tourism, Arts and Cultural Development, we're going to share with them why we believe it's important that 2% of sports wagering revenues continue to go into this account and make sure that the arts and culture in Massachusetts continues to stay strong, right? So this is just a little like here's where we are in the process. There's probably going to be an opportunity to advocate once that Senate bill sort of starts to get moving, but that Senate version isn't going to really start moving, we think, this is what we're hearing, until September. So we got a little bit of time, but this is just to put on your radars as like, hey, this is a thing. We're probably going to want to try to work to make sure that this happens. Okay. So we're sort of done, right on time. That's great. This has been a wild year, right? I just want to remind you that we want to keep these webinars free. We want to keep all of our resources free. And we're able to do that because of all of you. We're able to do that because organizations across Massachusetts believe that it's important to have an independent advocacy organization that's supporting them and their interests. We also are doing it because individuals know that Massachusetts is a better place because we have a vibrant arts and cultural community. And so there's a couple different ways that you can support our work. If your organization isn't a member, or if you think you haven't renewed, please do. And if you want to consider it for just a couple of dollars, think of $5, $8 a month, you can just sort of keep our work going. So now I have just a logistical item, which is we are taking an August recess. So the legislature is a full-time legislature, but they usually take an August recess. So we too are going to take an August recess from these updates. Mass Creative is continuing to work. We are not taking the month of August off, but we're going to pause these webinars and we'll resume them on September 10th. In the meantime, things might happen and we will be sure to communicate with you via email. So make sure you're signed up for our emails. And then we also put in the chat both mine and G's email addresses, because if there's something that comes up, an issue or a question that you have about these local dollars, if you have a organizing question or want more understanding technical assistance on legislation, we're around and we're happy to help. But we will see you again on September 10th. I'm going to stop sharing my screen briefly, well, actually very much briefly, and just check in and see if folks have any questions. We are over time, so I understand people might have to run, but if you got a minute and you want to just ask a question, let me know what we can do to help. I'm just gonna look. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. If anyone feels like just raising their hand or turning their mic off, unmuting themselves and saying hi and asking a question, happy to. Otherwise, we're going to sign off. So again, email us, you call us, we are around, we are happy to help. We will continue to keep you updated, and we'll see you soon.